We're bringing back Bruce Lesley, the president of First Focus on Children, because what's happening across our country, in our states across the country, really shines a light on the latest big ugly bill, I like to call it, and the down cascading effect on state budgets and the impact of on our children. And we really wanted to bring Bruce back to talk about that, because what Josh and I find is candidates are come to us, how do I talk about this? I feel like I'm on defense all the time. I'm always running up, what do I say? So I was like, let's bring back Bruce, because it's not just about policy. It's not a numbers game. What we know in politics, what we know in persuasion, to move our voters from couch to polls, as we've talked about on this show, is impact. When people finally feel the impact in their lives, they get triggered to do a little bit of research or figure out why. So that's why we wanted to bring Bruce back to kind of talk about it, workshop it a little bit. But where we're going to start today is Bruce did a talk a couple weeks ago, and I'll let you give a summary of that. Bruce, it was really outlining with some key groups in your ecosystem about the impact of the big ugly bill. The one key, I will start with a little statistics to kind of ground us, is when you think about the federal budget, only 1.59% of that budget goes to 0 to 3-year-old little peeps and the little humans in our lives, the little people. And that was correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was reading the stats and the numbers, Bruce, that was a 20% deduction from 2021. So that's where I want to start us. If you could give us a summary as what your organizations and the counter sister groups that you work with, what are they seeing on the ground from that? What's going on in that bill? Where are we and what are we dealing with right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mary and Josh, for having me on today. I love your podcast and the work you're doing. It's so vital, and so it's really great to talk to you today. So the thing about HR1 is it's really on the heels of the ARPA bill, the American Rescue Plan Act, and like that bill for the first time like made major investments and like made the child tax credit fully refundable for every child in this country. It made added investments in Medicaid and early childhood programs, and so the share of spending for kids actually went up to 12%.
Oh,
And
wow.
I would point out that kids are, close to a quarter of the population, so still not, are they getting their fair share? We would have argued no, but like way better, because now it's down to 8.57%. And the reason is those things were allowed to expire, and now the administration's doubled down. So HR1, we talk about it as children were left last in this bill,
Hmm.
because in almost every respect, like this bill spends $4 trillion in tax credits to wealthy individuals and corporations. But what was it doing? It was cutting Medicaid by nearly $1 trillion. And like 10 million more people will be uninsured because of it. And one of the things that people forget is like 41% of the births in this country are Medicaid. And then CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, so it's almost half. And for a party who says that they're all about, having more babies and being pro family, like I can't think of anything worse than what you're doing is you're slashing maternal child health programs. But on top of it, this bill cut $200 billion out of SNAP, or the what was formerly known as the food stamp program. And then even the stuff they did on the child tax credit, if you go on Twitter, you'll see they're like, oh, we increased the
Mm.
child tax credit. Well, I'm sorry. It didn't even cover inflation since 2017. It added more people who don't get the full child tax credit. So in 2021, every family got the child tax credit. There's now 19 million people in this country, children in this country, who don't get the full child tax credit. And why? Because their families make too little. I can't, it is
That doesn't make
unfathomable.
sense.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes zero sense. So the people who need it most get the least. And to give an example of that is, we all know, like if you have a baby, you
Hmm.
lose income. Like you lose income through pregnancy. You certainly are not earning
Oh,
money
I know.
having a baby, right? And then postpartum. And then, so the whole family loses income. And what is our public policy at the federal level? We cut your child tax credit. Like, what?
That
Right?
doesn't make sense.
It makes zero sense. And so in so many ways, like that we call the, the one big beautiful bill it's a disaster for children. It
Yeah.
really is in so many ways. It really left kids worse off. And so now the share of spending for kids has dropped to 8.57, and we estimate that that will drop into the sevens
Oh, wow.
in the next few years. So again, kids are a quarter of the population, are only getting like 7% of the federal budget in a couple of years because of these cuts that they impose, so that corporations and wealthy people could get more tax cuts.
Well, and my question here is like all of this, and this is the annoying perspective that I'm always going to have on this, Bruce, is all of this is great, but this is all facts, and that's not how people vote. That's not how people understand things. Like it's fantastic to know. Well, not fantastic, but it's great that we know this now, but how do our candidates do anything about it? Like because our candidates are out there talking about it, and it's like, oh well, I'm Republican because my family, like I'm family first,
Right,
and
right.
I've got my golden retriever, and I've got my that like very classic red stance. Um, But how do we frame all of this so that candidates can connect? Because the thing that they're hearing are, well, we got this Trump account and we got this
Right.
money in the bank for my Trump kid. But how do these candidates who are running today, running this year, actually connect all that stats that you're talking about with voters who feel like they are in the family party?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Well, I think that one of the things we would say is people just need to look at the campaigns that Jackie Sherrill ran for governor of New Jersey, and Governor Spanberger now in Virginia ran, because what they did was they really talked to people about kitchen table issues, right? This is all about affordability, and they talked to people about, we are going to support tax credits for you and your families, for children and families. We are going to provide childcare. And that was like meaningful to me to people. And the other side, so like, I live in the DC area, so I saw all these Virginia ads, and the candidate on the Republican side, 57% of her ads were anti-LGBTQ ads.
Cultural stuff,
57%.
just cultural war shit. Excuse me,
Cultural
but
war.
yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And so,
Yeah.
but in the app, when
There are
progressives,
kids here, Mary. Kids.
but like when Democrats don't talk about it, voters are like, oh, okay, what are the issues? If all they see, like in the presidential campaign, right, they've got $200 million in anti-LGBTQ ads. So people are like, oh, that's the issue. So
Right.
what was, I think, different was that Cheryl and Spanberg were like, no, no, no. The issue for families and children is these issues. These are kitchen table, and people got it. And so, despite the fact that the opponent ran 57% of her ads on anti-LGBT, like, it did not resonate. I mean, Spanberger won by double digits
Yeah.
in Virginia, and it's a purple state.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would say is, like, you have to center children and families in your campaign and make them a thing, because if you do, then people will, for voters, it's like, oh, that's the issue then. In
Yeah.
the absence of it, they don't know that education matters, and you've got to talk about it, and people are beginning to, and I think that that's the huge service you all are providing, is you're showing people, like, you have to talk about these things in ways that resonate with people.
Yeah. And it's also the language you use because when you start listening to that race and what Mandani did about affordability,
Yeah.
and I kind of caution people to say affordable housing, because we know when kids are housed, they do so much better in school, then they have more access to meals. But what we're trying to train candidates to say is stable homes. When you say stable homes, a place to be safe, people get that because we know in our district, one of the values that indexes very high is family safety. Regardless of blue, white, purple, red, they just value that everybody wants their family to be safe.
Yeah.
So, what we're also trying to say is, unfortunately, during the Reagan economic areas, the language that they were using and the culture that they were putting forward and cutting all the programs, people adopted they really adopted things that you're talking about that should be a right as like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. If
Yeah.
you can't do it by yourself, you're on your own. And well, we'll give you a little handout. But now what they're doing is rather than thinking that those are necessities in our family community structure, they're saying that they're extras and they're also corrupt. So they're trying to control the narrative rather than saying, you know what, everybody deserves a safe place to live. And the other thing, like when we go back to Minnesota, when they tried to point out that there was these corrupt childcare and they were taking subsidies and there was this rampant corruption, childcare is for the workforce.
Right.
Childcare is for workforce infrastructure. So what I really want to push forward to candidates is Josh and I goes through this all the time. We call it the lexicon. Don't say this, say this. And
Yeah.
people will start to go, oh, that makes sense. You coined a term that I want to talk about because I think it's genius. And where did it come from? And why are you writing about it more and more for people out there? You have a Substack called Kids Can't Wait because they can't. You're only one once. You're only two once. And in that, you talk about organized abandonment. Tell me more about that framing because when I go through all of your Substacks, everything that you're pointing out, it's intentional. They're putting forth policies that really impact our children. And I'll say one more thing. I was just driving yesterday in my zone of driving, and one of our county councilmen, she's a Republican, there's this big billboard with her. Her face is right there. And she's got her two little kids kissing her cheek saying families first. And I'm like, nah. So
Right.
why is, and I know everything that she done is everything that she's passed in the last year or so is really abandoning our families. So where did you come up with that? How did that trigger for you? And talk to me more about how that is driving some of your Substacks.
Yeah, absolutely. So late in life, I decided to go back and get a master's degree in political psychology, sort of a new
Mm,
field. And I was like, I really want to understand some of exactly what you're talking about. It's like, what is it when people talk about things? What are the words that matter, and how do you frame issues and talk about things that really speak to people? Because I work on an issue, children, that
hmm
everyone says they're for. So what is going on? Like, why are we not investing in kids? Why, as a society, are we really divesting? And how does this happen? And so, a couple of things that really hit me is I read a couple of studies about this issue of deservingness. And so
mm,
exactly what you're talking about the bootstraps. So like we as a nation have this sort of mythology around, individualism and pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps and all that kind of stuff. And it's really centered on sort of, who's deserving and who's not. And I would say one of the things I would
mm,
argue is that when we talk about some of these issues, we really should center kids in them in some ways. Like if you look at polling on the child tax credit, for example, if you center kids in the debate, support is 83-11. If you center adults and then should they be working, like what, like you start bringing in all these other
mm,
things and people start thinking, what, they're not deserving. There's this intentionality on the other side to really point fingers, and
hmm
consequently when you do that the support drops to 54-46. So
mm,
plus 72 or plus 8, that is
hmm
wildly disparate, right?
Totally.
So one of the things that so then I was reading some of the psychology stuff around this, and someone talked about this phrase, organized abandonment. I'm like, that is exactly what's going on. So when you think about the agenda, and it's two things. One is it's otherizing people. So in the
Mm-hmm.
news, what are we doing? Our government is attacking immigrants, it's attacking the LGBTQ community, it's attacking poor people, it's otherizing them because they can't attack children, right? But they're
Right.
doing it in these other ways. They're attacking LGBTQ kids, and they're attacking immigrant kids, and they're so that's the agenda. And so then when they say this whole fraud thing, it's all about that. It's like these immigrants are committing fraud, and they're trying to get people to not support Medicaid, childcare, or SNAP anymore. So it's the idea of like, can we create a boogeyman, or like this is
Mm-hmm.
bad, so that then people will pull away from it, and that's where we get the organized abandonment. And so if I can now tell people, like Robert Kennedy is like, don't trust vaccines, don't trust experts. Thing about that is that for parents, any of us who've been parents know
Mm-hmm.
that, like, you don't know, like when you have a baby that's born, you don't know what you're doing. And you
Nope.
want experts in early
Mm-hmm.
childhood, you want experts in vaccines, you want pediatricians, you want early childhood and educators to, it is all about, I need all the people who are smart. I want people who are protecting my water supply so my kids are getting,
Right.
good food and water and air. And it's so it is not, most parents want experts, but the agenda is let's cast doubt, let's pull, give people vouchers so they pull away, and it's all about you decide on your own, which
Mm-hmm.
is isolating, and it's abandonment.
Yeah.
And that's the agenda. The agenda is to dissuade people from being any supportive of helping families and children. And why, and it is has some power to it, because people are like, they're being told like, we're on your side, we're, this is all parental rights. And what
Mm-hmm.
it's really doing is it's pulling away from providing any supports for parents,
Yeah.
like you're
And
on your
and
own.
yeah, and you know what? And you think back, I remember this little story, but when you have a newborn, when you have that first child or even your second child, you are so vulnerable because you've got this new little life. I'll never forget
Yeah.
when Gabriella, my daughter, she was literally about a week old, just coming home, and my husband, my ex-husband at the time, stepped out, and she just finished nursing, and I put her down in the bed to change because she, spit up on me, and then I went to pick her up, and she literally projectile vomit. I mean, the fear in me was just immense because thank God
Right.
at the time my pediatrician was a dear friend of mine. I was like, Dr. Ronnie, what did I do? What's wrong? But that fear that you're always doing something wrong and you need help immediately, but yet we're not doing that for young families in that most vulnerable time. Here she did something was, oh, she just overate. Ronnie was like, okay, calm down. She's fine.
Right.
But that feeling that I, did something, and then, that fear of who do I reach out to? Because that's not there anymore.
Right.
A lot of people travel and have moved away from home and they don't have family safety nets anymore. So, yeah. So for me, this is something that I've really been pondering with candidates because it rubs up against the values of who we were as Americans.
Yeah.
That whole family, that identity is really
Mm,
starting to shift, that cultural shift, because that's not who we are. And I also, the other thing that struck me that I wanted to reach out to you was the Substack you wrote about that case down in Texas turning away children from going to school if they're immigrants.
Right.
Education is the cornerstone of American culture. And now you're saying who can be educated and who can't be educated, and walk into that door of everybody knows who their kindergarten teacher was. That was like Mrs. Hayes. That was joyous. That was
Right.
fun. That's your little identity. And now we're cutting kids off. We want to cut kids off from that. So
right. Well, and I
I
think
God
I was just gonna say I think there's such a difference between um, taking away parents' freedoms, which is kind of how they're positioning it, or taking away resources and taking away freedoms. Like those are two different things. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where we need to position it differently. Like I grew up very conservative. I talk about this all the time, but a lot of that was like very libertarian views in the approach of like, I just want, like, I grew up very religious, very conservative, and it was very much like a fear that the government was going to come in and be like, you're not allowed to worship Jesus anymore. Like that
Right.
was the core of it. Um, but I think that has shifted so much just across the board. And we could talk about that all day. But I think that is an interesting approach we've seen work well in purple and red states, which is to take that approach of this isn't giving you the freedom to choose your kid's school. It's taking away
Mm.
certain freedoms. You no longer have the choice to send your kid to daycare. Now your only choice is to keep them at home. Like, should the government really be able to decide that for you?
Yeah.
Like I think that
Yeah.
kind of framing is a really interesting approach. And I think that the education is a whole nother
Hmm.
factor because I think there is like in addition to the systemic or however you said it, the systemic abandonment
Yeah.
of
Hmm.
of children, there's systemic removal of education, right? We're trying to de-educate, that's social media, and then we're trying to stop people from being educated across the board.
Hmm.
And so I think that, I mean, we see statistically, the less educated a group of people are, the more likely they are to vote Trump, and we saw that with Trump more than any other group president before that. Um, so I'm curious your take kind of on the Texas story as well,
Yeah.
but on that overall, that like kind of that piece of the systemic mission to make education inaccessible for groups of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And think about like our role in education in the world. Like
Yeah.
we have been the nation over the last 40 years that has championed, girls getting no longer being denied education in countries across the world. We have been the ones that have said you must provide education to kids with disabilities. You must. And here we are at this moment in time saying, but if people are immigrants in our communities, we're now going to deny them.
Yeah.
Like, so we're championing it across the world, but in our own country, we're now going to
Yeah.
deny
You
people.
got to do it, but we don't got to do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And even the voucher stuff that you guys have done a really great job of highlighting, it is really abandonment. It is like we're not as a society going to no, it is your job to educate your child and make your decision. And it's like I don't like most parents, that's not what you're looking for. I want to go to the librarian and say, hey, what are my kids really interested in dinosaurs? Do you have some really great books
Right.
on dinosaurs? And the librarian being like, yeah, here's like seven. And like those are the things like people count on. Like you count on your teacher. I don't know how to teach my child multiplication tables. Like that's why.
Okay. New math. Try new math.
Yeah, any of that stuff, right? Like that's what they got degrees. They know what they're doing. They're teachers,
Yeah.
and and in this whole vaccine thing, like I can't even imagine right now being a parent and having this fear of like I've got to figure out the vaccination schedule for my. It's crazy, and but that is the
Hmm.
goal. That is the goal is to make people doubt, don't trust experts, and it is on you now is
Yeah.
and forget that we care about all kids. You should only care about your child and screw everybody, all the other kids. And it is not where most families, I think that's the thing is people that it's under this frame of parental rights and exactly like you said, Josh, like it's all about choice and empowerment, but it's not. It's what they're doing is they're isolating you and leaving you all by yourself. And if problems come up for your kid and your family, it's like that's on you. And in
Yeah.
fact, if you fail that kid, now we can actually punish you for that. Like
Yes.
that's one of the interesting things is like you're now seeing all these laws come out because if a government's going to abandon and you fail the kid and something happens, that's your fault.
Yeah. You know, it was really interesting yesterday. We are fighting data centers here in Indiana, as in Texas, Virginia, all across the country. And there was a guest lecture panel series over at Notre Dame, and we all heard about it at the last minute. And I was like getting on the phone. I was like, I want the Zoom. Can you set up a Zoom, please? And they did because a lot of us wanted to listen to it. Because Mike Hicks, the leading economist here in Indiana, who's over at Ball State University, was part of the panel. And I was like, I want to hear what he has to say about these economic impacts of data centers. So the person who was doing the panel said to the Zoom folks, we could ask questions. So I asked them the key question, and this is where I want to get back at what we're talking about here is I asked them about the incentivization structure that states are creating for data centers, the tax abatements, all the no tax on their equipment, their 50 years of no tax increment, these TIF zones, etc.
Yeah.
His exact words, no, they are robbing the communities. The only benefit is going to the industry itself. So what we're seeing across the board is we're building an infrastructure, an ecosystem that is only benefiting the wealthy and the business community. My question is, if you had your ideal system, we need to go back and create a funding ecosystem that supports families.
Yeah.
Because he clearly said we are incentivizing the wrong industry or imbalance. It's quite imbalanced. It is robbing our communities. We're robbing our children because who's in charge right now is a lot of these states. I know in the red states and the federal government, the GOP is really keeping their eyes on the prize of the corporate America, and we're paying the price. So if you had to start changing things, you were calling out this as an organized abandonment system. But if you had to design, because we know people vote for something and not against something, what would that funding ecosystem look like for, in your vision, in your experience, that truly supports and brings balance back to what the federal government and what the state government should be leaning into?
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of it is really thinking through, when you're as a parent, the most vulnerable period is like when you're a young parent, right? Because you're just starting your career, you have student
Mm,
debt, it's housing is impossible, you're making the least amount of money you're going to make in your career, and now you have all these added costs of a child. And so I think that as a society, we need to do far more to support young children and their families, because that's the moment. Like if we care about families,
hmm.
like that's when, as a parent, that's when I needed the most support. That's when we were the most in
Yeah.
debt, the most. And now I'm like, fine. Like now's the time to actually tax me. And
Yeah.
but I needed supports back when I was in when I we were in our young family. I have four kids, and it was hard.
Hmm.
And by the time like we came pulled out of debt and went to someone to say, okay, what do we need to do about college? They were like, like you're done. Like you're way behind you're not going to make it. And so kids today are just young families are just in. So I would say that as a society, if we say we care about families, we should not be abandoning them. We should be investing in them. And we know the return on investment. Like
Yeah.
return on investment in for little kids, early childhood is enormous. And like our book, our analysis, early childhood programs as a share of the federal budget is 0.38%.
Wow.
And it's down almost three quarters since 2021. We're doing the exact opposite. Like you have enormous payoff as a society, and we are abandoning them. And the consequence is going to be enormous. We're gonna raise a generation of kids who are less prepared, less able to succeed. And it makes no sense as a society. We should be surrounding and supporting those families, not abandoning them in the way we're doing and divesting.
Yeah.
And exactly what you said, Mary, like where are we putting it? We're giving tips to these corporations to build data centers. Well, guess what? That means that that company that comes in and has, they're going to have employees who are going to go to the public schools. Guess what? That company is paying no taxes now to support
Yep.
those kids.
Yeah.
But someone is. Um,
Yep. Who would you say, what state, because I would like to look outside of the states, but let's see if we can find an example. Is there a state, I lean into Massachusetts, that's where I'm from. They are number one in childcare and
yeah.
education. Could you give me some examples of what states, of who's doing it right, who's getting it done, and who's leaning into, that early development, child education, and what kind of results? Because there's has to be, they're doing it, people are voting for it, so therefore there must be positive results from those types of programs.
Yeah, in different ways, some states are doing some really great things. Like I would say, I think there's something like 14 states in the past few years have adopted, for example, a child tax credit, and they make it fully refundable. So it's not leaving the parents who need the most help
Okay.
behind
Yep.
and children behind. So so there's some states doing things like that. New Mexico, for example, one of
Oh,
the
yes.
poorest states, just did a universal, pre-K program, right,
Yep.
or early childhood program, and it's like it will be amazing if they pull that off for families. It's an incredible thing. I know other states have really taken big steps in childcare. I know Michigan's working on a big
Mm-hmm.
childcare initiative. And I think you guys have talked about this too. Like in the other thing, like in Michigan, there's this RX Kids program.
Mm-hmm.
I think you guys have talked about that, if I recall, on the podcast. But anyway, there's
Yes, that's what Josh talked about. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there's amazing initiative, right, where they're basically investing in, women when they're pregnant, and then investing through the whole first year of life and providing cash assistance and supports and wraparound services, and it has been shown to have enormous benefit. And so, like, there's some really cool, innovative things that states are trying to, and
Mm-hmm.
local governments, right, are trying to do that we really should, as a nation, look at and then try to adopt for everybody. Because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, like a lot of this state local stuff is really great, but it's happening more in blue states, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, like as an organization, I care about all kids. And for the kids in Mississippi, we need federal response because it's not going to happen
No, it's
otherwise.
not going to happen here. I think I've shared it with you before.
Yeah.
A child doesn't have to go to school here until 7 years old.
Wow.
So when you think about that education, that development, that socialization, that's a huge cutoff point. And then when you think about it, going back to having those pre-care, I'm sure Josh, you know it. You're in the midst right that you have a 1 year old. If your child can go to preschool earlier, you cut off that child care expenditure in your budget. Now you can take that money and save for down payment for your own home. So that increases your family wealth because we all know childcare is that much money that you stop spending that for 2 or 3, 4 years because you've got access to early childcare.
We spend
There you go.
$1,100 a month
Yeah.
in daycare.
Yeah.
Right? So $1,100 a month, you times that by 12, you're talking 15,000 times 4. Okay, there's close to $60,000 to put towards to a down payment for
This
a
is
home.
so depressing. I don't like that we're doing this math. I like to
Sorry.
just ignore the fact that I'm spending this amount of money.
Yeah.
But
And at a
that
time, right? At a
right?
time when, you're early in your career and like all those kinds of things, like in this
Right.
moment in time, right? The best investments. And it's crazy as a society, we're allowing the poverty rates of all our society from 0 to 100, right? The 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 peak poverty level in our society is babies. What? Right? Like it's nonsensical. And it's because of these things. It's like you have less income, you have new expenses, childcare expenses are huge,
Hmm.
and it's at that moment we're taking away people's child care, and we're saying, we should cut child care, like 0.8338% investment in early childhood. Like what?
Right.
We're doing everything backwards.
We are. And the system's so broken. There's Jessica Cauldron. I forget I can't, I'm going to blank out on the title. Josh, could you look it up? She wrote a book and she did a study here in Indiana. I'm looking to try to get her on the podcast, but her study focused on Indiana. And she opens the book talking about a young woman who had a child, and then her and her husband decided to have a second child. The first child, she was working, had the child in daycare, had a second child, ran the numbers, decided he had a good job, that it was best for her to stay home because two children in daycare, the math wasn't working out. It'd be better for her to stay home. Fast forward, less than a year after the second child was born, he was killed. A terrible accident. So she is a single mom now with not a huge family network around. And this woman is working three jobs. And she's damned if she do, damned if she don't, because if she doesn't work these three jobs, she can't get some benefits here in Indiana because you have to be working X amount of hours. But if she comes off, if she works a different job and takes a little bit more hours, it doesn't cut the cost of living, the childcare, and everything. She will lose some of those benefits. So she's on a tightrope. So
Yeah.
she cannot, so she calls them safety nets, but a safety net is supposed to help you get back up. And
Yeah.
these programs are not helping young families or young mothers get back up. They're holding them hostage. So I feel like we should be calling them safety nets. We should be calling them, there should be something else we should try to call them, because to me, a safety net means it's there to help lift you up and get you back on your feet.
Yeah. No, I love the way you said the damned if you do, damned if you don't, because like it really is like if she stopped working, she starts to lose her child tax credit. But if she works, earns too much, then she loses, child care support and Medicaid and some of these other things. And so it's like
Yeah.
we trap people,
Yes.
and then we point fingers at them, right? It's
Yes.
like she's working three jobs, like you're saying.
Three.
Well, then someone's going to criticize her for like you're not taking care of your kids enough, and it's
Right. Right. Right.
like
Right.
and interestingly, kind of like to beat a dead horse a little bit is so her spouse passed away, so her
Correct.
income dropped. Again, the child tax credit punishes you for that. At the very moment you need the most support, the child tax credit goes, oh, you're not earning enough. We're now taking away some of those supports for all of your children. Like what? And like in Social Security, there's supposed to be a safety net by which if you have a spouse who passes away, kids can start earning. Most families have no idea. And Social
Hmm.
Security knows. So why doesn't Social Security just start providing you the benefit? They
Yeah.
know that there's been a death. They know that you have children. Why aren't they just providing that benefit? But they make you apply. If you go on their website, you can't find the application. They make it
That you can't.
impossible.
Mm-hmm.
We set it, and again, this is my organized abandonment theory is like we set it up so it's so hard. And for the people who have so much going on, when you're a parent, it's just
Ugh.
24/7, and we make it impossible to provide services to even things that they're eligible for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Well, and it de-incentivizes, really somebody making something better, making their lives better, because there's really nothing that she can do in that situation to make it better other than somebody dying.
Yeah.
Like I heard somebody on a podcast say I had the best financial year of my life because my grandma died. And it's like that's not a long-term strategy,
Right.
Right.
but it's true. Like I don't know how you're going to climb out of the debt that she had to pay for the funeral and for like all these other things, and she's not getting support
Yeah.
for
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's kind of this self-fulfilling problem where
Yeah.
you then get into you're incentivizing her to not work. because then she'll actually be able to feed her children, because she'll be able to do the tax credit, you know? Or what else does she really have the option of, you know?
Yeah. Well, but see that, but it is the whipsaw effect because if she stops working, she loses her child tax credit entirely. So it's like this, it's a no win. Like if you work, if you earn too much, you lose benefits. If you aren't working, you lose benefit. It's like it, you have to earn this like 28,000.
Exact
Right,
amount.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Like
And
that's,
at the end of the day, she's describing on the weekends because she's working a 12-hour shift in a factory to pig in some extra dollars. She's starting her day at 6 a.m. and finishing at 6 p.m. On the weekends when most people are spending time and bonding and having that extra downtime with their kids, she's leaving her kids. It tells the story that she leaves her children overnight at her sister's because rather than wake them up at 5 in the morning, so she doesn't see her children on Friday night. They don't wake up on Saturday morning to do morning breakfast and cartoons and what the thing you do as little kids.
right.
So and so talk about that opportunity to grow and learn and be there for your parents. She's losing all that because she's forced into a system that says she does not deserve the assistance right now because of something that happened uncontrollably in her life.
Yeah.
And
100%.
so I guess
Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, like, Bruce, how do we address this problem, like, when we're on the campaign trail? Like, when we're knocking on somebody's door and they say, well, I don't want my taxes to be paying for lazy people. Like, people need to,
Yeah.
the classic bootstrap argument. How do we actually approach that? Because we get into these philosophical debates about teaching a man to fish, and then we're talking about fishing, and
Right.
like, so how do we actually approach this?
Yeah, I think it's very purposeful, right? Because it's like if we can point fingers and we can do deservingness, make the arguments around deservingness of certain types of people, then that's how you diminish support for these programs and things like. And so I think the key thing is really centering it on what do families need. And because when you do it that, then everyone knows, right? Like kids, families need childcare to go to work. Kids need childcare. They need high quality childcare. They don't need crappy childcare. They need an education. They need, health care. They need, and that's things when you talk about it from a sort of a what does a kid and family need perspective,
Mm-hmm.
everyone gets that because everyone needs that. I think it's when we allow this whole deservingness thing and who deserves it and who doesn't. And I don't know about those people. Like, and you saw that, like, I saw a really interesting interview with this woman who talked about the child tax credit and saying, oh my God, it becoming fully refundable was life changing for my family. Like, we were able to, like, we had food, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And then they were asking her like, what does this mean for your kids? And it's like we could, I had more time. I could, read them more books. I could give them these
Yes.
experiences. And then but then in the same interview she said, but my ex doesn't deserve it. Like he would, and it's even so, even people who are
Mm.
getting it, we have to like make it more about all kids need this, not because she could see it from her perspective of me and my kids need it, but I'm not sure about those other people. And that's I think that's what we've got to change because this organized abandonment thing is effective. It's an effective message that people are sort of like, I'm deserving, other people are not. And
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
it's hard
Right.
problem.
Yeah. When we look at the data for one of our candidates, one of the candidates we're working with, it's interesting because when I cross-reference using that terminology against the data in this district in HD5, what indexes really high for psychological triggers and values in this district is safety of one's family
Yeah.
and community. So when you start thinking about the values of a district, that it's purple, but when anything that happens that goes up against the family, They're triggered. That doesn't work for them. So it's like we have to start leaning into that because we, as candidates and operatives and nonprofits, what we do is we try to persuade voters based on voting history. And I'm going to scream this from the mountaintops until November. It is not about someone's voting history. It's about their values. It is about their values. Use data sources that tell you as the candidate what your district cares about.
Yeah.
That's how you do persuasion.
And if candidates aren't talking about these things, like if they either take it for granted or they're afraid or they don't kind of make it about these kitchen table issues for families, then the culture war people will that they will frame the conversation. And so then people
Yes.
think that the issue is about bathrooms or whatever. And it's so not. And yet
No.
in in the silence of some candidates, they have led that to be allowed. They have opened that door
Yep.
for that to be the frame. And I saw an interesting interview of the guy who was the Moms for Liberty, one of the Moms for Liberty founders. Her husband said this is
Okay.
like the greatest thing, this Moms for Liberty thing, because we had no traction, and now we can frame issues around parental rights and deservingness and those kinds of things, and it really works for it's really effective. And the key thing is you've got to counter it, but you can't do it as myth versus fact, right? Like the whole fraud, like
Yeah.
Donald Trump talked at the thing about we're going to have a war on fraud. Well, instead of saying, well, no, it's not really blah blah blah, blah, like people who care about children and families need to say, no, this is a war on children and families. Like when you cut childcare, that is you are harming children and families and their ability to work and to participate in society. You need childcare. And
Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
that's the problem, is sometimes like we allow one side to frame the debate,
Yes.
and then we do this myth versus fact, but you're
Absolutely.
talking on their terms, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is I want to move into your child impact statement because you hit the nail on the head. I'm going to bring this to data centers because we're allowing some people, the higher ups, to frame why data centers are beneficial. What's really interesting, again, going back to that panel discussion yesterday, Mike Hicks called out the argument is one of the other arguments is it's bringing jobs to the community.
Mm-hmm.
And he pointed out on his Substack, he did a study in Texas, down in Texas, because data centers have been there longer. And he said explicitly, there is no net positive job creations due to data centers. He even joked the person who has the biggest job is the person going in at night laying the mousetraps, because he said there is a job influx the first quarter for getting things set up, but then everybody walks away. He also said that the jobs are transitioned or moved over and away from housing, community development, other jobs that create long-term stability in the community, and jobs and a job that or a development that actually could have a child center in it.
Yeah.
So this framing that they're using that, we're creating new jobs for the community, he said, is net zero. With that being said, it's all about the framing, but you came up with a toolkit to help with that. You have this child impact statement toolkit. So it made me trigger me because we have some families in here who we need to be framing some of the data center arguments on the impact of children.
Yeah.
What are the impacts? What are the health impacts? And you walk us through how you came up with this toolkit. You have it broken down really nicely. You've shown there's been some success stories, and there's these 7 guiding questions. So walk us through, how did you come up with this, and what is the backbone of this?
Yeah, so I have to say that I can't take credit for
Okay.
them. There's a woman in California, Wendy Lazarus, and who works for the Kids Impact Initiative, and she has really been very smart throughout her career on like what can we do around technology and those kinds of things about enabling support for families, right? So an example of something else she's done is if you're eligible for SNAP, for example, as a family, by definition, that child is eligible for Medicaid. So why do we make
Uh,
families like tell again to the same agency often Like, yes, I am who I am. My kid is who I am. They know they have all this information, right? And how,
Right.
what's
Red tape. Yep.
yeah. So she has this thing called Express Lane, so that if you're eligible for that, you are automatically eligible for Medicaid, right? So that's an example. And so this was something that she worked on, and we're trying to actually get a bill introduced at the federal level to make agencies do this. But this is sort of a self child impact
Yep.
statement. And it's exactly what you were talking about earlier is like, okay, so the response, so that, they want to build this data center and they want a TIF, right? A tax incremental financing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Most families are like, that has nothing to do with me, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
TIF, what's a TIF? I don't need to know that. That's, yeah, you do, because the TIF means that there's no taxation for schools, for childcare, for parks, for anything. And so one of the things, like you said, the child impact statement can do is to say, all right, so this is a project. How does this impact children and families? And so the idea is to like look at the issue, develop a plan, you do some research, and then you assess like, okay, so if what is the impact of this TIF, right? How much lost
Mm-hmm.
revenue is that to our community? Is there any benefit to it? And what you're saying is there's been research that says not. So
Yep.
you see that, and then you say, but now I've lost, the ability, like we now don't have funding for our schools. We don't have funding. And so then you can then put a plan together and say, actually, we as a community, on behalf of children and families, say, no, like this is that, like the TIF is actually detrimental. And
Mm-hmm.
consequently, this new data center, if built, must pay taxes like everybody else
Yep.
and provide
Yep.
support. And like if you're taking up land, you should be required to set aside land for parks and schools and those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. Like those, it's those kinds of things. And because we don't do them, we leave communities all the time with overcrowded schools, or you know uh, areas that don't have a grocery store, right? So they're food
Mm-hmm.
deserts. But if we forced government and agencies to actually think through this stuff, they would be like, oh, because kids are often, we would argue that every single issue has a child and family component to it that's often missed. And
Mm.
and if you force people to sort of think about it, they'll go, oh, I see. Like, okay, if this did bring more people to the area, then now you have overcrowded schools, and now you have
Mm-hmm.
but no revenue for them, or like those kinds of things that need to be
Yeah.
thought through, and they're just not.
They're not. And because the other thing you could do that, you could run through the process for the TIF districts. You could run through the process on an environmental
Yes,
perspective and lens.
yes,
Like the health, the noise, the engines, there's so many components on the health perspective. And then you could do another one on the environmental impact,
yeah,
in terms of the water,
water, yeah,
the change of land, the ecosystem that it's being development on. So, I mean, data centers in of itself, you could run through the child impact statement toolkit from those three lenses. And I think what happens is then you build your coalition. Because in terms of winning some of these arguments and fights, we have to start working in coalitions. And when we find out, well, hey, we're on the same page on different lenses from this, but here's why. And the other thing I would have to say is what I feel about this toolkit, it's very empowering because it gives you the roadmap, but it also allows you to go to the table with really solid, concrete whys. Why, instead of just saying stop data centers, that's not going to work.
right,
In terms of the psyche of trying to get change in your community. If you just say you're not for something, okay, that's somebody just arguing and they're just protesting for no reason. This is the next step. Protest. I'm not saying don't protest, but we need another element of the fight. We need something to show up to the table, to the debate, to the county council meetings. So
yeah.
yeah. So where have you seen anybody go through this process and have success with it?
Yeah, so like other countries do this in a big
Hmm.
way, and then also, like, actually it's a requirement at EPA. So the Environmental
Interesting.
Protection Committee Agency has a requirement to do child impact statements, and the reason for it is there was an acknowledgement that I can, as an adult, because I have a larger frame and all those kinds of things, I can take in higher bad particles per,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert on the environment, but like I can be subjected to more pollution than a child and a baby. So the idea was like, okay, for people who have asthma, like if you set the standard at what an adult can take, it leaves children horribly vulnerable. So the idea was like you have to analyze chemicals and pollution and water quality also a lens. So you can like do the assessment of for population at large, but then you have to do a secondary eval and say,
Okay.
does this chemical, does this whatever have a disparate impact on children? And so that's the idea. And on almost anything, like you can even think of things like, let's say a hospital is building an emergency room. Okay,
Hmm.
well, that's great, right? Is it? Because if it doesn't have pediatric protocols, that could actually be detrimental to the community, or at least for the parents. If they take their kid to that emergency room, that
Mm.
room is not equipped and doesn't have the staffing or that are focused on kids, then it kids can actually die, and there's evidence of that. And so, almost any kind of those kinds of zoning decisions and policy, any policy decision should really have to go through that. And even when you're building a road, is there bike lanes for kids, or is there pathways for kids to walk to school?
Mm-hmm.
Have the right crossing walks, like all that kind of stuff is so critical
Yeah.
for kids. And it's just often forgotten. And like even in my community, like there was not that was not done when we developed. So when our kids played sports and soccer, we'd go to soccer fields all weekend
Mm-hmm.
long, right? We had to drive 20 miles away because there was no planning to develop parks in our area. So we're driving up the interstate to a whole other community to basically play soccer, and
That's interesting.
it's
Yeah.
those kinds of things that are just
Yeah.
forgotten and missed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know candidates could, two things just come to mind. You could have one of their volunteer groups go through this child impact statement for SB1, simply looking at in our last budget bill, $800 million tax breaks were given to corporations. What's that impact on children? $800 million. And then the second thing is we have an exorbitant amount of hospitals being closed. I know Johnson County just lost the maternity ward in their hospital. What's the impact on children and mothers? You could expand it to mothers,
Yeah.
expected mothers, but the babies, outcomes, the whole nine yards, when we have an infant mortality rate that's exorbitantly high here in Indiana. So you could run through instead of just screaming from our lungs, which some people do. Let's focus the children
Yeah.
and say, what kind of impact has this maternity ward closure have on our community? And then you message from there because, again, going back to the original statement, centering the children, we're abandoning our community, our families. So it makes the full circle, but this gives you a North Star, a navigation point to kind of drill home the what to say and how, and then we can talk about how to say it.
Yeah, and it's the hopeful things that will trigger people to constantly ask the question. Like we really think that if we could get all policymakers at the federal, state, local level to any time there's an issue that comes before them, right? So it's TIF financing. Like if we can get to the point where people are thinking, is this good for kids? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what the answer is, but let's use this child impact statement. Let's really think through it. Because like on the surface, right, do a tax incremental financing thing, like what does that have to do with it?
Yeah.
Once you sort of start even thinking about it, you're like, oh, actually, right? And that's if we can get people to at least start thinking that way, I think it
Mm-hmm.
really game changing for children and families.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's a great guideline for candidates across the board is taking a look at how are the issues you're focusing on impacting your families, the kids in your district or whatever area you're running in, and just be very clear about connecting it to those values specifically. And I think that's a great way to connect with people, because then you're not getting into the, the word fights and the back
Mm-hmm.
and forths, because you're saying, here it is specifically for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big, beautiful bill is a great example of that on a national scale. The SB1 is a great example for Indiana level, but just across the board, taking something that is really in the news and saying, okay, but how does this affect us, our families, from
Mm-hmm.
our framing? And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that is a great way to go about it. And I think that child impact statement was a great, beautifully done way to look at that, because you forget the holistic way that it affects people. And you want to make sure as a candidate that you're talking about everything that's going on from that perspective of a lot of people, especially our independents that we have to win over, right, are saying, oh, well, I'm not that into politics. Okay, well, politics is into you, and it's affecting you somehow. So here's how. And so
Mm-hmm.
being able to position that of my kid's going to be hit by a car playing soccer, you know, that's a great way. I mean, maybe that's a little extreme, but not really,
Yeah.
If there's no
Um,
crosswalk there, the risk goes up.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then it forces like, and then the response is like kids can't walk in their community. And so parents are
Mm-hmm.
just constantly driving around. Like the burden then shifts from like protecting kids by, structuring things the right way to, again, it's back to this organized abandonment. And then it's all on the parents. Like the parents have to
Mm-hmm.
constantly think about, like, I can't just have my
right.
kid walk to school. I got to figure out who's going to drop them. I've got to be at work. How's my kid getting to
Mm-hmm.
school? And
Right.
it's stuff like that that we just like constantly, and
Right.
even like Josh, when you brought up the Trump accounts, like even if you like let's think about the child impact statements to that is like, okay, so how does this work? And the way it works is if you're wealthy, you can actually build an account. But one of the things that's being sold about it is it's like really helpful to families now. It is not. It like
It's
no
not.
No.
families can't access it, and low
No.
income families like can't build it, and so
Yeah.
consequently we are again like helping wealthy families find another tax break, but it's not helping families.
Exactly.
That's
And
good. They're suffering real bad right now.
yeah,
Those wealthy
Right. Right.
families just
Right.
really, they're
Right.
being
Well,
persecuted, you know.
when you look at that, because I looked that up, because I don't know if you were talking about it, but when Cory Booker put his baby bond, if you put his initiative to try to get baby bonds, automatic enrollment that, in terms of investment into the future, up against the Trump accounts, and you analyze them back to back,
yeah,
long-term investment projected for the Trump accounts was only 44,000, so that's a 4,000 tax credit. But the Cory Booker's baby bonds was a $50,000 investment in the future.
yeah. It's and that's exactly like it sounds great, but like if you kind of do the impact statement, and you're like, that really doesn't help
Right. Well, and I
No,
think
it
that's
doesn't.
I think that's a lot of stuff that we see on the red side is exactly that. And obviously, we're very partisan. I know. First, focus on children. Are you guys are technically nonpartisan,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. We're not.
Yeah, you're nonpartisan. I'm not nonpartisan, so I can talk a little more shit than you. But I feel like on the red side, we've seen, especially under this Trump era, we've seen a lot of that style of things, especially for our kids that look good on the surface, but when you dive deep, and I think that's why these type of child impact statements are really important, and it's true on whichever side you're on, I guess
Mm.
technically. Although I don't care if you're on the red side. No, I'm kidding. Bruce cares, so go talk to him. But it's important to really lay out, okay, how are these things impacting
Yeah,
on a
Mm.
deeper level, because something that looks good may not actually be making a
Exactly.
difference,
Yeah.
or may not be making the difference you think it is,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
let me tell you one other thing that I think you guys will love, because you guys have done a lot of stuff on education, but like the voucher plans at the federal level. So basically, the way it works, like it would be one thing if what we were doing is saying, "Hey, you spent a lot of money on your kid for private school. We're going to give you a tax credit. A tax credit because you spent." That's not how these things work. These things work by which a very well, like Elon Musk can donate, a set of money to basically these accounts, and these voucher accounts, and they go to an entity that is also run by wealthy people, and so they get the fully 100% credit. So if I give, let's say I give $10,000 to this thing, I get a $10,000 tax credit, plus I get a tax credit on my state taxes. I've now made money.
Money.
I made money by giving
Jesus, you made
money
money.
to this thing. Now this thing goes to this really wealthy group, who then says, okay, so Mary's kid is going to, we're going to support it at a private school. We get to wake off a set of money. So we'll take $1,000. They now make money. Now the private school, which is also is getting
Making money.
you got nothing. Parents got nothing here. Like, a bunch of people are making money here, here, and here, but like it's not. It's
Yeah, they
Again,
don't people read the fine print because in the tax accounts, Trump accounts, his buddy is running those Trump accounts.
right.
He's making money. It's a private bank. It is a private bank
Yeah.
over here that you're putting money in and somebody else is making money off you. So read the
That's
fine print.
well,
exactly
and
right.
again, it's wealthy people who have been struggling lately, Bruce. So I think you're like all they wanted to do was go on vacation onto a nice island, and then somebody leaked all their emails. And so I don't understand, and so they should at least get a little bit of tax credit back.
It's like when you say it like that, you're like, duh. Oh God. Well, Bruce, as always, it is always so enjoyable to talk to you, to learn more. We want to make sure that, over the summer and into the fall, we have you back to keep these conversations alive, because we need to be centering the children. And please do reach out if anything comes up. You're like, hey, I want to get this out there. We need to talk about it, because we need to start flipping some of these state houses. And the other thing that I'll have to say, it's been very interesting that people aren't hearing about these because of the news deserts. So we need to start talking about these a lot more. There's no local news covering these stories.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think you all do an amazing service. I really appreciate you really centering kids and families in your conversations, and your focus on sort of what's the message and how do we improve how we talk about these things, because it sounds great, right? The Trump account sounds great. When you kind
Yeah.
of look behind you look behind, it's like, wow, that's really, it's not great.
Yeah. No,
And
it's
there's a
not.
huge problem. The child
Yeah.
tax credit is terrible, what they did. And
Yeah.
so,
Right.
Yeah.
well, we
Be-
need some
Yeah.
accountability.
We totally do. And I will say one of the things that we're focusing on is really focusing on a couple key issues, and children are one of our key focus. So, like I said, we don't want to be just talking about one issue, then move on. But we know that education, our children, is really something that families need to hear more and more about, so they can learn themselves and make really good educated decisions on who they're voting for.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah, absolutely.
what y'all are doing
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for your time again, and I'm glad I got you out of meeting.
Yeah,